Legend of Total War here, and today I'd like to share with you guys some leaked information that I've received from my unofficial sources from within the production of Total War Warhammer 3 that will detail what you can expect to see in the content of the next 3 DLCs coming for Total War Warhammer 3. This is the most extensive amount of information that I've received in terms of leaked information, and I think it's really important that I handle this information with as much care as possible. I'm sure a number of people would just prefer it if I just started listing this stuff off straight off the bat, but I think that that could end up doing a lot of harm, so I think it's really important to just sort of lay the groundwork to understand what the full picture is like, because this stuff here can actually end up being quite complicated, especially the first DLC I'm going to talk about. So, first thing I want to talk about is the difference between like inaccurate information and just false information. So the leaks that I've had in the past from my various sources, I would say that none of it has actually been false information, but I have received inaccurate information. I'll give you an example of that. So because I've got multiple different sources and I will try to cross-reference between them. So for example, when I first started getting access to these sources, the first thing I would ask is, what is the next historical Total War game? So that was the first thing that I sort of dug my fingers into. And what they would do usually is not give me a straight answer. They would be a bit cagey about what the next historical Total War game would be. They'd say, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but you know, it's got gunpowder units. And so I then have to just narrow it down more. And as I would keep narrowing it down over the course of weeks, I would tell people that would ask about it on live streams what my findings were. And so originally it started off as, oh, it seems like it's going to be a 19th century warfare Total War game, which was wrong, but I was sort of just narrowing it down. But eventually I got a straight answer, and that it was actually World War I Total War, and that it is going through development hell, and that it's actually been put on hiatus. So the whole conversation became utterly pointless, because that game is just, at this stage, never going to see the light of day. So all the conversations that we had about the next historical Total War game were kind of pointless, because I sort of prematurely spoke about it before I had all the information, but I was slowly piecing it all together. In the case of Total War Warhammer 40k, all of my sources are all pointing to it and saying, yes, Total War Warhammer 40k is definitely coming. But as for the specifics, like what are the starting lords, what are the starting factions, what's the pre-order race, that kind of stuff, I don't have a consensus on that at this stage, and so it's really important that I don't talk about it, because anything that I talk about is subject to change, especially things that are possibly years in advance. And so talking about anything that I've discovered about 40k at this stage is completely pointless. But as for the question, is Total War Warhammer 40k coming? I am very confident that it is, because all of my sources are pointing to it, saying it's on track, it's coming, and it's coming sooner than you might think, sort of thing. But we should start hearing about it in the next 12 months, basically. But of course, these things are subject to change. Now, in the case of Star Wars, that is so far in the future that it's just not worth worrying about talking about it at this stage. It's currently in development, apparently, but it could get cancelled. So any leaks about Star Wars right now, completely pointless. Now, the leaks that we're going to talk about today, about the next few DLC for Total War Warhammer 3, these are not so far away in the future, especially the first one. Now, the second and third one, things are subject to change, especially I'd say for the third one. I would say for the second DLC, it's pretty much locked in, and that one shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Now, the next thing I need to cover is this particular leak here that came on the Total War Center that ended up being reposted on the Reddit. So pretty much all of this information is in line with what my sources have told me, except for this bit here. The next Lord Pack will feature Cathay and Ogres, Monkey King versus Golg Maneater, which is what I'm going to call that guy from now on, for I think obvious reasons. I wouldn't say that this is false information, but like if my stuff is actually correct, I would say that this was probably correct at one point, but Creative Assembly has changed their plan on this DLC, because I had heard from my sources that this was kind of the case as well. But again, it wasn't like specific information. But now that we're getting closer to the date that it's going to be sort of announced, it's becoming more accurate. So I would say that at this point here, that this information here isn't false, It's just inaccurate. Whereas, for example, if this guy had said, the next Lord Pack will feature Khorne versus Slanesh versus Nurgle, that would have just been straight up false. There's no sign of that whatsoever in the next DLC. But because there's a lot of elements to what is coming, I would say that this is mostly accurate with some inaccuracies. And that is possibly what's going to happen with these leaks over time as well. But as long as the overall structure remains pretty similar when it is actually announced, I would say that this is a very reliable source, and I just need to keep you guys updated as things get changed. So, let's start talking about the first DLC now that we've sort of laid down that groundwork. I think it's super important that I avoid any kind of speculation in this video, so that I'm not just filling in the gaps where there are unknown. So all I'm going to do here in this video, so as I'm reading through the content, is just basically just read off a Word document from my other monitor. I can't show you the Word documents or anything like that. All I'm just going to do is verbalize it. And I'm going to avoid all forms of speculation. You guys are completely free to speculate however you want, but I'm going to avoid doing so. I'm just going to be reading off a list. That way we can avoid inaccuracies, which I want to try to achieve from now on. Try to make this as accurate as possible. My goal for this is to have 90% accuracy on these particular leaks. So, 9 out of 10 things be correctly named, correctly timed, that kind of things, like in the right DLC order. It's also possible that lords from one DLC get moved into another, which is kind of, from my information, what happened here. So the Monkey King is no longer part of the next DLC, but the Monkey King is definitely coming, and it may have been the case that Monkey King was originally part of like a 3-faction DLC between sort of Cathay Ogres and Monkey King, and that has possibly changed. Again, I don't know because I don't have that information. All I've got is what I've got now, right? So now I'm sure you're like, quit beating around the bush and get on with it. I just really need to make that groundwork clear. So the first DLC is going to be called, at this stage, the Lords of Shang-Yang. It includes 2 legendary lords, 1 legendary hero, 2 generic lords, 2 generic hero, 7 units that have 5 variants to them, and 3 regiments of renown, which will basically include 22 total pieces of content in this paid DLC. As for the price of it, I have no information. As for the timing of it, I have no information. It should be coming out this year, but that's speculation, so I need to avoid that, okay? But I think saying that it should be coming out this year seems to be the general consensus. And as for the FLC, it'll be 1 FLC Legendary Lord, which will be Golg Man-Eater and his mercenary ogres. So the data mined information appears to have been correct, that Golg is coming, and he'll actually be free to everyone that owns the Ogre Kingdoms DLC, because that's the faction he belongs to. Now, as for the DLC itself, Lords of Shang-Yang, it's really important to keep this in mind that this is a confusing DLC, right? This is something different than what Creative Assembly have ever done before based on the information that I've got. It's not going to, they're using the previous game's DLC structure from Warhammer 2 of 2 lords and an FLC lord, but the way that this works, this DLC is a Cathay DLC, entirely Cathay, right? But the problem here is, right, is that they're making Cathay a multicultural faction. I don't mean that as a problem for the faction, I mean a problem for explaining how this works, because I don't have all the information, and there's going to be a lot of room for interpretation. So the information that I do have is that the lords that I'm going to talk about are sub-factions of Cathay. So they are going to be part of Grand Cathay as a whole, but more like mercenary legendary lords. I don't know if they'll be able to be confederated or do any confederation with the other, the main dragon lords. I don't know how much of the other roster they're going to be able to draw from. All I've got is this Word document right here that I'm going to read from. Okay, now as I said in the community post, the lords are 2 currently unknown characters, right? I went looking everywhere I could possibly find for any information on these characters. Couldn't find anything. I asked the Warhammer YouTubers, nothing. Okay, so the first legendary lord is named Mung the Brutal, and this guy is an ogre for Cathay. So it's an ogre character that's not part of the Ogre Kingdoms is part of Cathay as a sub-faction. And the second legendary lord for Lords of Shang-Yang is named Bathsheba, who is also a sub-faction for Cathay, but is a Tiger Man legendary lord. And so each of these legendary lords comes for Grand Cathay an assortment of lords and units that they can make use of. Whether the other factions of Cathay can make use of them, I don't have that information. Okay, so for the ogre-related content in this DLC, the generic lord is called a Leering Devil Tyrant. The generic hero for the ogre content is called an Ogre Paymaster. Then the units being supplied by this DLC is Hunting Beasts, Man Crusher Giant, Leering Devil Man-Eaters, of which there is 2 variants. So, no speculation. Bit like anti-infantry or anti-large, but I don't know specifically. This is 2 variants of a Leering Devil Man-Eater. And then there is a Leering Devil Man-Eater Cavalry. So that's for the Ogre side of this particular content. Not for the Ogre Kingdoms. Now, that doesn't mean that the Ogre Kingdoms might not get any of this content. I just don't have that information, right? This is for the sub-faction within Grand Cathay. Then for the Tigerman side of things, so you've got Bathsheba as the legendary lord. Then their generic lord type is called a Sawai. Their generic hero is called a Claw Speaker. And then their units are Tiger Warriors, of which there are 2 variants. Then Tiger Warrior Stalkers, of which there are 2 variants. And Iron Claw Tiger Warriors, of which there are 3 variants. And as for the regiments of renown, I don't have the exact names for these regiments of renown. It just says that there is going to be 3 of them. So I don't have that information. And like I said, I'm not going to do any speculation here. I'm just going to read off this Word document and let you guys interpret it as you see fit. So, as I said, I've got information saying that the Lords of Shang-Yang implements basically two sub-factions into Grand Cathay. One for the Ogres, one for the Tigermen. Basically, Tigermen are going to be incorporated into Grand Cathay because the faction of Ind probably isn't coming. That is based, there's a little bit of speculation on that. Okay, so I really want to limit on that. Okay, so that's what I've got there for the Lords of Shang-Yang. Now, from what my sources have said, is that this is basically locked in. If there's going to be any changes, it will be minimal. So they may change the names of the Legendary Lords, because there's no lore on them, right? So they may change Mung the Brutal to Hung the Not-So-Nice. Who knows? They can make those changes, because it's not set in stone at this stage. But as for the overall structure of the DLC, you should be seeing an Ogre Legendary Lord for Cathay and a Tigerman Legendary Lord for Cathay. Those are the current names. They may change. That's possible. Same thing with the name of the DLC. It's possible that they might change it to something else, but it's currently named Lords of Shang-Yang. So that's the first DLC. Now the second DLC, this one's a lot easier to deal with. Okay, so I won't have to do any kind of speculation with this. The second DLC is Dogs of War. So this is what's coming after the next DLC. So Dogs of War will include 2 Legendary Lords, 1 Legendary Hero, 1 Generic Lord, 2 Generic Heroes, 8 units, 9 Regiments of Renown, for a total of 22 pieces of content, which will include 1 FLC Legendary Lord, which is D'Chala for Slaanesh. I don't know if it's D'Chala or D'Chala, I'm not entirely sure. But so she, I think it is the snake dark elf for that's been heavily mutated, and that'll be for Slaanesh. Doesn't seem like it comes with any additional units or lords for that, so that's just FLC. Now, as for the Dogs of War, this stuff you can already find in the wiki. These are already existing characters, so none of this is particularly out of the ordinary. But I'm just going to read this out in terms of the list that I have. So the 2 Legendary Lords that will be available to play as in the Dogs of War is Borgio the Besieger and Lucrezia Belladonna. Both of them have heavily ties to Tilia as the Dogs of War faction. The Legendary Hero is Midas the Mean. The Generic Lord is a Mercenary General. The Generic Hero is a Hurling Wizard. There's 2 Generic Heroes, Hurling Wizard and Paymaster. And then their regular units are Pikemen, Crossbowmen, Duelists, Paymaster Bodyguards, Cannons, halfling hot pot catapults, light cavalry, and heavy cavalry. So, based on the information I've got here as well, it says that this is kind of going to be a hybrid faction. They're going to draw from units from other factions as well. Those are not the only units that they can recruit. How they go about that recruitment, I'm not entirely sure. It just says that they will have access to more units than just that. That's basically it. Basically, what they're trying to do here with the Dogs of War DLC is really implement the hybridization of a lot of these factions and really expand upon the idea of mercenaries. Now, as for the Regiments of Renown, all of these Regiments of Renown you can find on the Warhammer wiki as well. So, just going through them. The first one is Lumpen Kroops Fightin' Cocks. Next one is Volen's Venators. Next one is Vespero's Vendetta. Then Braganza's Besiegers. Then Rico's Republican Guard. Next one is the Al-Qatani Fellowship. Then Leopold's Leopard Company. Then Marksmen of Maragliano. And then Birdmen of Catraza. So that's the content that's coming for the Dogs of War DLC. I don't think there's anything particularly complicated about that. It is entirely possible that some of these units will be switched out for other Regiments of Renown. Some of the names may change. Some of the choices may change. I doubt that the name of the DLC is not going to change. I doubt that they're going to change the actual Legendary Lords. But, they might change, because there's a long list of potential Regiments of Renown they can draw from. They might change one or two of those. This is where the inaccuracy thing that I was talking about. Because this DLC here, this is either late this year or early next year. There's a fair bit of time for Creative Assembly to make changes to this DLC. But it's already been data mined, so most of you guys already knew that Dogs of War was coming. And now you've got at least a leaker telling you that it's not the next DLC, but the DLC afterwards. Now, the third DLC. Now, this one here is the one that is most likely going to be inaccurate, just because of the amount of time that will pass between when it's actually going to be announced and when I'm talking about this. But I'll tell you the information that I've got right now, and then if it's inaccurate later down the track, I will try to update you whenever I can, whenever I get the information. So, the third DLC planned is the Monkey King. So this includes 2 Legendary Lords, 1 Legendary Hero, 1 Generic Lord, 2 Generic Heroes, 5 unique units that will have 7 variants, and 3 Regiments of Renown for a total of 21 pieces of content. And the FLC Legendary Lord is Li Dao, which is for Grand Cathay. So the Monkey King DLC is going to function very similar to the Lords of Shang-Yang, in that it's going to create a sub-faction for Grand Cathay. So there's essentially going to be like 3 sub-factions within Grand Cathay by the time all of these DLCs are out. So you've got the Monkey King side of things, the Monkey Court, you've got the Ogre side of things, and you've got the Tigermen side of things as sub-factions for Grand Cathay. Again, I don't know if these are going to be able to be confederated. How they're actually going to function is left to be seen. All I'm really talking about is what pieces of content are coming. So the 2 Legendary Lords for the Monkey King, the first one is Sun Wukong. The second one is Sukong the Trickster. The legendary hero is Tang Fu, Sentinel of the Forest. The lord is called Kong Mo. So this is a generic lord. Kong Mo. The generic heroes is called a Wukong Chieftain and a Scarback. And the units are Wukong Warriors, of which there are 4 variants. Wukong Mu, of which there are 3 variants. Wukong Ru, they'll have 2 variants. They'll have another unit called a Great Yeren, which has 2 variants, and a Vermilion Warbirds. And as for the Regiments of Renown, I don't have the names of those Regiments of Renown. It just says that there is going to be 3 of them. So that is the leaked information that I have for you for the DLC coming for Total War Warhammer 3. Now, I fully understand if you don't believe this information, because especially with the Lords of Shang-Yang stuff, this stuff here is pretty unbelievable, right? Especially going with such obscure characters. But I think what they're trying to do, I'm getting into speculation territory here, so maybe not for this video, okay? But yeah, let me just say this. I completely understand if you don't believe any of this stuff, but time will tell. I've given some definitive names for these DLCs and the overall structure of what's being included. And if we see when the time comes that it is nothing like that whatsoever, then you can very easily say, Legend, your sources were bullshit, and I will take that humble pie. But if the overall structure, like if the first DLC is not necessarily called Lords of Shang-Yang, but has two sub-factions that are Ogre and Tigerman based, then this was quite accurate, because sometimes names can get changed. Same thing with the Dogs of War stuff. I don't think there's going to be too much change with that. But, you know, one or two things may get switched out. But the Monkey King being quite far out, probably more than a year from now, that has the most likely chance of having things adjusted. It's also possible as well that if the Lords of Shang-Yang DLC sells really poorly, that other DLC may be cancelled. I'm obviously not hoping for that. I'm hoping for more DLC for Total War Warhammer 3, but just being realistic from basic what I've been speaking to from my sources is that these DLC need to sell well in order for these other DLCs, in order for them to continue. So that's the information that I've got right now. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that this has informed you, and we will see in time whether or not this is actually accurate or not. I appreciate you. Don't forget to be skeptical as well. I'm not asking you to just believe me. If you don't believe me, if you're sitting there on the Reddit and you're like, Legend's full of shit, good. You should be saying that. You should be skeptical of anything that anyone is telling you if they're not providing you evidence. I'm not providing you with a damn shred of evidence. You shouldn't believe me. But time will tell whether or not I'm actually right, and you should be skeptical of every single thing that I said, and you shouldn't trust anything of this. But we will see. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.